Okay, so I'm here with Melody, and we're going to be talking today about cell and gene therapies. So Melody, can you, just to get started, can you tell us a little bit more, what are gene and cell-based therapies?
Well, thanks for the question, Alex. It's actually a very good question because if you look at the agencies, you already start getting confused, frankly, because they don't even have the same terminology. So when you look at the US and FDA, we generally speak about gene and cell therapies. And then they also introduce the word regenerative medicine. So that's, the jargon that you will encounter in the US. Whereas when you go into Europe, they created the term advanced therapy medicinal products. So there you already see the differences. So it's complicated. Let's start with that. But before I actually go into what I think are gene and cell-based therapies, some of them are well-defined, some are a bit more in the gray zone. I would actually ask you, as the layperson, so to speak, what comes to mind when you hear the term gene therapy?
Thank you. Thank you for that, Melody. So my understanding of gene therapy with my limited scientific knowledge would be something that changes or manipulates the genetic code of the patient to cure a genetic disease. That's the main one that springs to mind from my that's my point of view.
No, that's actually quite spot on. And then if you look, for example, in the FDA guideline, it defines gene therapy as an attempt to modify or manipulate the expression of a gene or alter the biological properties of a living cell. And then when we go into, we're going to keep it a bit more general now. If we talk about gene therapy mode of actions, you generally speaking have three broader ones, which is we could replace a faulty gene, we could inactivate a faulty gene, or we could introduce a new or modified gene to replace, but also just to coexist and actually produce a proper protein. So there are different ways of what you can do as well when you talk about gene therapy. And one of the examples of such therapy is actually a product called Luxturna, which is a fancy name for, actually, it's not the fancy name, it's the brand name. The fancy name is something that most people cannot pronounce. Including me.
You always find that, don't you? It's they are more complicated.
But Luxturna is actually the first in vivo approved gene therapy, and it was approved by the FDA. And it is a gene therapy for inherited retinal disease. So for people that are blind or go blind caused by the disease, they can actually see again after the treatment. It was developed by Spark Therapeutics, and what it does, it actually introduces the functional gene to the cells, and thus it does replace the disease-causing gene.
So, Melody, what about the COVID mRNA-based vaccines? They contain mRNAs, so are they a gene therapy?
Well, I mean, there is where things get complicated, but if we look a little bit more into the definition of what gene therapy is, and that is to alter, modify, we actually do get the answer quite quickly that it is indeed not a gene therapy. And the reason for that is that it does encode for the spike protein, well, most of the time. Second generation will probably code for other things as well, but in general, the mRNAs that are on the market now code for the spike protein of the coronavirus. So what it doesn't do, it doesn't alter the genome. It doesn't alter the genome of the host, aka the human that receives the mRNA. So it only expresses the protein of interest. It is presented to the immune cells, and the immune system will make antibodies. So it is not a gene therapy. I mean, of course, mRNAs are in everybody's mind these days due to the corona and the pandemic. But mRNA is actually only a small fraction of therapeutic RNAs, so to speak. And there are things like antisense inhibitory RNAs. But yet again, these are actually also not considered gene therapy. They're considered oligonucleotide therapies. It gets more complicated when we start talking about CRISPR, which is gene editing, which is mostly based on RNA. That will start being inhibitory. But on the other hand, these type of CRISPR type altering, these are also things that are used to modify ex vivo certain human cells. And then, yes, that is considered a gene therapy, but the RNA itself isn't the therapy. It's what it does. And well, one of the examples here would actually be the famous CAR T cells, such as see, that's, me pronouncing it probably wrong, Kymriah. And actually Kymriah or Kymria, wherever you want to pronounce it, was one of the first approved CAR T cell therapies for the treatment of acute lymphoblastic leukemia. And CAR T cells, yet again, is getting complicated. They are also called cell-based immunotherapy products.
So, Melody, I was always under the assumption that CAR T cells were just a cell-based therapy. But now you're sort of saying, are they also a gene therapy at the same time? Or is it both?
Well, it is a good question yet again, because yes, indeed, you get confused with the fact that it literally has the word cell in it. But if you look again at the definition of the gene therapy, it does say gene therapy alter or can alter biological properties of cell. And there are actually, or CAR T cells are an actual example of such a manipulation of cells. So currently, CAR T cells are made by collecting patients' own immune cells, and then they're genetically modified with RNA or DNA, mostly DNA. And then they're expressing what is called a chimeric antigen receptor. And then they're infused back into the patient to fight off the cancer, right? So technically speaking, there are gene therapy because they are genetically altered, the cells themselves. But since there are cells, they are then going back into the body to do what they're supposed to do. A lot of people also call it immuno-based cell therapies, especially immuno-oncology, as CAR T cells are predominantly used in the oncology field.
Brilliant, thanks, Melody. It's all getting a bit complicated, maybe for someone like me. What is then considered a cell-based therapy or cell-based therapies?
Yeah, so I think the most important word I should use immediately at the beginning is that they're non-modified cells. So these are actually cells. Most of the time, these are cells that come from a patient, and these are cells that we know have positive properties by reducing inflammation or suppressing a certain immune response. And these good cells, they're extended, again, ex vivo. So they're taken out of the patient, they're artificially extended in the lab, expanded, and then they're put back into the patient. But the crucial difference between the CAR T cell, for example, which goes the same route, versus the actual cell-based therapies is that these cells are not genetically modified as the CAR T cells are. And you can have what is called autologous or allogeneic cell treatment. That means it comes from either yourself and it's put back into you, or it comes from one healthy human, and then those cells are expanded and then they're given to numerous patients. I was surprised when I started working in the cell-based therapy world, is that the first cell-based therapy was actually approved as early as 1997. So, we have been, cell therapies have been around for a long time. They just haven't gotten the attention as others. And most of the time, or also today, it is very difficult to have these manufactured in a way that is cheap. Let's start with that, but also in a way that it can benefit a lot of people, especially when we talk about the autologous, when we take it from one patient, give it back to the same patient. And of course, the holy grail of things is to have an off-the-shelf cell therapy that you just take, you can mass produce and give it to everyone. We are not there yet, although the streamlining of the manufacturing process and also making them more acceptable to all humans, I mean, broadly speaking, that is where we are at the moment. And that is the big goal. The other issue is when we look at, so for example, the product from 1997 is called Carticel. And that's cartilage cells. They're also called chondrocytes. They're removed from a patient, expanded, and put back. And these are like, I mean, no one has a problem with those. But cell therapies are also embryonic and adult stem cells. So these are also part of the cell-based therapies. And especially when we talk embryonic stem cells, there are ethical considerations and ethical restraints. And that is also something that we need to work through to put, frankly, a global framework in how to handle these embryonic stem cells. And also, frankly, what source to use as an embryonic stem cell, because one source would be aborted fetuses and, extract these stem cells. And that's something that a lot of people don't want to know.
Very controversial area,
yes.
Isn't it? Yeah.
And so and I mean, also one thing that's very these cells can potentially differentiate into any cell in the body, and making sure that you are able to track these cells and understand the fate of these cells in vivo is extremely analytically challenging. And that is why they have been around for a long time, but their full potential hasn't been used yet. And I think the bottom line is that when it comes to gene and cell-based therapy, it is a very exciting field because you have the potential to actually cure diseases with unmet medical need, especially genetically causing diseases. I think that's not how you would genetically causing. That seems like weird. It's more like diseases that have a genetic cause. They can be cured. Actually, people that are blind can see again. I mean, it is what is possible with this technology. But we are only at the beginning of harmonization across the globe, across agencies, in order to set a proper framework to work with anything, either gene therapy or such as a controversial thing as embryonic stem cells.
Brilliant. And then finally, Melody, is there any gene or cell-based therapies currently being developed or that you're aware of that are quite exciting, or anything that you're working on, or anything that's interesting?
For sure. Sorry I was just like, yes, something springs to mind immediately. So one of the things, when you look back at CAR T-cell therapies, at the moment, you have to take the patient's own T-cells, you modify them and put them back. So it's an expensive treatment. It does work though for a lot of the people that receive them, but there are a lot of side effects, potential side effects attached to the treatment. So you have next generation, which actually use CRISPR as well in order to be more efficient in vivo. That's what I find. So the next generation CAR T cells I find extremely exciting. And also to start looking. So currently CAR T cells are against blood-borne cancer, and that we haven't gone through the solid cancers yet, so the tumor growing cancers. And that is frankly because a lot of the time the cells are not able to really penetrate that type of solid, but there is progress on that front. Secondly, The next thing that I find very exciting about CAR T cells is actually that they're taking the T out and they're starting to use natural killer cells or macrophages by using them in manipulating them genetically and putting them back into the patient, making them more efficient. So you have the CAR NK cells, the CAR M cells. So there is, you could
basically manipulate the whole immune system
Yes.
to attack a cancer or a disease of some sort.
Exactly. So that's exciting. Then the last stream that I find extremely exciting is that people are trying to make a CAR T cell off the shelf. And that means that they're stripping them to be seen as a foreign T cell in any other human. So there is also streams now on developments that you can have an allogeneic CAR T cell treatment, which means you can take one CAR T cell and administer it to multiple patients. That will also reduce costs and make it a more quality process and more controllable as well.
Yeah, just knowing what I know about cell-based therapies and gene therapies, that would be like you said earlier, the holy grail, wouldn't it, of developing them basically en masse.
Yeah.
And making, that would be great. And it lowers costs at the end of the day, doesn't it, then, for the patients?
Yeah, and more convenience. They don't have to go through the whole having their, immune cells harvested and that kind of stuff. So I think in terms of patient compliance, that would also be a huge improvement if we could just give them one of these CAR T cells off the shelf, for example.
Brilliant. Thank you, Melody. I'm just thinking, I don't think I have any other more questions. So thank you for this, for spending time on this interview and sharing your, discussing cell and gene-based therapies with me. And we'll conclude it there. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Alex. It was a pleasure as always. And so I'm always very happy to have these kind of discussions. I think it's important, because it's complicated. So we should talk about it.